Hi everyone and welcome. Here we have my so-called mixed bin. It's a worm bin with a variety of different types of worms living in it. It's red wigglers, European night crawlers, and African blue worms. It's a 99-day-old bin at this point, and it's been 9 days since we last fed it. The food that it got was all kinds of really quick composting stuff, lettuce leaves and cucumbers, and I think cantaloupe rinds. All stuff that I would expect is probably gone by now. So let's give these guys a quick look-see. I got a feeling we're not going to find much leftovers, and then we'll give them some food. Now, last time we fed 9 days ago, I don't remember anything out of the ordinary, anything that we would feel like we're keeping an eye out for or watching. I think it's pretty much all business as usual, a pretty smooth sailing bin, and my hope is that it continues to be that way during today's feeding. So all we're going to do is check out how things look, give the bin a quick feeding, and leave it at that. Now, a lot of times lately I've been checking the outer edges of the bin outside the middle being where I usually feed the bin. I've been checking the outsides of the bin last after feeding. I figured this time I'm just going to switch it up a little bit, and we'll check the outside of the bin first, how these outer edges are coming along first, and then we'll work our way into the feeding area. Sometimes I wonder if it's because I'm disrupting the middle area, is that maybe the worms all make their way out to the inside, so maybe first I get to see a whole bunch of worms on the inside where I put the food in. And then when I finally get around to closing up the feeding area and checking the outskirts of the bin, there's a whole bunch of worms there now. Maybe it's just the same worms I'm spotting. So not a whole lot of action going on in these outskirts of the bin, but a lot of good castings, some leftover bits of food like these corn cob chunks, but not a whole lot of action. My assumption is that the bin probably has the majority of its occupants hanging around the middle area where the food was last added. But I mean, you know, 9 days after giving them all kinds of really yummy melon rinds and cucumbers and stuff that I would assume would get eaten pretty quickly, I would think that they probably already ransacked the feeding area and have already exited that area. So I could be wrong because I'm not finding a lot of worms on the outskirts. I mean, I'm definitely seeing worms all over the place. Everywhere I look, there's a worm hanging out, but no mobs of them. Maybe when we get down to the middle, we'll get to see a little worm party where the food was. This thing I think we checked in on. We didn't really check in on it, but we bumped into it recently, and I suspected that it's some sort of unnatural, some sort of synthetic material, because it never makes any progress at all, and that was weeks ago. I'm making the call on it now. I'm removing it because I got a feeling it's not going to get composted. So we're going to proceed to the middle section where the food was last added, and maybe that's where all the worms are hanging out. So let's see. Let's get down in here and check out what the deal is. Okay. Yeah, that's the deal right there. It's just a big pile of stuff with a whole bunch of worms hanging out in it. That's kind of cool, isn't it? Look at all the really fast-moving little guys. Man, are they fast. Those are the blue worms. So what is it that they're so jazzed about? This is like a mango seed. There was a lot of bedding. It almost seems like the bedding, this big pile of paper here, almost seems like it might have been what they were so excited about. Because I don't see any scraps of the food that was put in here. This is not from the last feeding. This mango seed would have to go back weeks, if not months. Even though it's making some good progress, it's going to take a while for that to break down. So here's, okay, finally seeing some leftover. These rinds of the cantaloupe melon, sometimes these do actually last a little bit longer than just a week or two. Just those little rough, tough portions of it that make up that interesting pattern are usually something that the worms can't break down quite as quickly as the rest of it. But everything else looks like it's been done away with. Alright, let's just do one more probe down into this end of the bin and see what we see. As far as leftovers go, here too. A whole bunch of worms hanging out. Real fast movers. I think here too, I'm wondering what it is that's getting them to mob together. Is it some sort of a food item? I don't know. Usually you think it's going to be something really clear, obvious. You'd be able to just see it, but perhaps they've already, well, for the most part, consumed it, and that's why we're not really seeing it. Look how much dry leaves there are in here, though. Interesting. All kinds of leftovers from the previous feedings in terms of the bedding that was placed into the feeding areas for those feedings. All right. I feel like I'm kind of pushing into the time slot that I had intended for this. I felt like I would want to try to keep this video really short, maybe to 10 minutes or so. I already feel like I'm just biting into my allotted time by getting sidetracked and distracted by all the worms squirming around. Just, I don't know, I can't seem to help myself. Every time I see a big mound of worms squirming around, I just can't seem to resist checking them out. So I'm thinking a pretty generous feeding is in order, because I didn't find many leftovers. You saw what I found. It wasn't much, that's for sure. So I think we're probably going to have to give these guys a pretty good feeding, because there's hardly any leftovers remaining. And then that should keep them in stitches for another week and a half or so again, hopefully. I guess depending on how much stuff I end up bringing down here. So let's see what I can come up with. I'll head up to the kitchen now, tap into the supply in my freezer, and we'll get these guys fed and we'll be taken care of. And maybe even done within my 10-minute target time frame. Well, look at that assortment of stuff. All good stuff. It's stuff that's not going to last, if you ask me. It's more melon rinds. And in this case, it's cantaloupe melon and watermelon. Here we've got something that I don't feed very often. It's just leftover noodles, some spaghetti, and coffee. Coffee's kind of a staple item around here in my wormery. They get that all the time when I'm feeding. So I've got these scraps of bedding, kind of used paper bits that we found along the way while digging down. So those are always really good to just return back down into the feeding area, right along with these old food scraps. Not that there's many. This is probably the biggest food scrap we found. This old seed, as well as these little chunks of corn cob, all items that are very slow composting food items. So we're going to see if we can get all this paper bedding type stuff back into service as sort of the foundation to place today's feeding on top of. And I just want to try to unmat it and separate it a little bit so it's not just a big clump, because I guess the more surface area, the better, the easier it is for the worms to take advantage of all that stuff in terms of it being a food source. I mean, if there was just a big pile of it loosely scattered around, it would be, in my mind, maybe more as a bedding. But when it's soaked with juices and it's been retrieved from the bottom of the feeding area like that stuff was, I would consider it more as like a food item at this point. So I've also got some shredded paper here, chunks of paper towel. This paper towel I had used for another purpose elsewhere, and it was previously soaked with salty water, and I did my best to soak to rinse it. So my hope is that I'm not placing a bunch of stuff in here that's full of salt. I'm pretty sure I got the salt out by rinsing it all pretty thoroughly and wringing it out numerous times. So I, you know what? I just gave it the taste test. I stuck it on my tongue and I didn't taste not even a little hint of salt, so I think we're in good shape with that respect. Now let's see, how do we arrange this? I don't think I could break this into pieces because it's just a big wad of noodles. So whatever, I guess we'll position that in the center. I'm never really sure about noodles, but I believe there's something that the worms are going to like. And then I'm going to drop in all these little small chunks of melon rinds, cantaloupe melons and watermelons. I explained to my mom how I like to cut stuff into smaller chunks because that way I can kind of form the bag that the chunks are being held in within the refrigerator to more easily position them and make space for them in the refrigerator. So she gave me these cantaloupe rinds and she chopped them all up nice small little bits. So if we find leftovers of the rinds this time, they're not going to be easy to identify. They're not going to be like those big large chunks we saw earlier with that distinctive pattern on them, that cantaloupe pattern. So let's see, paper towel. A couple pieces of paper towel placed in here as kind of like a carbon supplement to their food. And maybe we can even take some of these old leaves, some of these seasoned leaves, and plop them in here too. I guess we're also going to probably bump into a few more chunks of old paper here. Once again, I'm going to see if I can take them apart a little bit so they're not just clumped together. So yeah, let's just throw some of these nice aged leaves down into the feeding area, and that should make for quite a delicious meal for these little guys. And you know, on most occasions I apply grit to the feedings, so I'm going to trust that the bin has sufficient grit in it to satisfy the needs of the worms, so I'm not going to bother with sprinkling any of that in today. And then the other thing we usually sprinkle in on my bins on top, across the top surface, is a layer of fresh leaves, but not on my older bins. And you know, since this bin is now 99 days of age, I believe it is at that age where we're going to start withholding stuff that we believe is going to be sort of slow composting stuff. Not to say that the leaves themselves are slow composting, it's just all the stems, right? The leaf will be gone, but this stem will still be there, taking forever to break down. So I'll usually treat around 100 days as the point in time when I'll stop adding leaves into my bins, with the assumption that I'm going to have, you know, a few more weeks for that stuff to all break down and become nice compost again. So I think we're in pretty good shape here. So we're just going to bring back our coverings here. We've got this old coffee filter indicating to us where we fed, and a couple pieces of top covering paper. All just little extra layers of stuff helping us retain the moisture within the bin without using plastic. To me, it seems like using just a few sheets of paper and maybe a sheet of cardboard almost does as good a job keeping the moisture within the bin as plastic, but still at the same time provides nice aeration for the bin as well. So that's pretty much where we stand now with my mixed bin of worms. 9 days since it was last fed. It's now 99 days of age, and this was its 11th feeding overall. So it's coming along really nice. So I've got a few things to take care of in terms of cleaning up and putting away, but I won't bore you with that. Before I go, let me really quickly say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.